Hello, my friends, and welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think. I am Ariane Rice, an Episcopal priest and leadership coach, and I'm so grateful you are here. And since you are, here is an excerpt from a poem. Traveler, there is no road. You make your own path as you walk. As you walk, you make your own road, and when you look back, you see the path you will never travel again. The poem is titled Traveler, Your Footprints by Antonio Machado. And I could not believe my good fortune in hearing it the week I was editing today's conversation with David Achata, an author, coach, trainer, facilitator, speaker, and former pastor, who so graciously shared some of his story of the roads he has traveled. For me, that poem just captures the theme of this conversation, that it is only in our looking back, particularly when we are trying to do the hard and holy work of healing and understanding the people, events, transitions, all the things that created the road to who we are. But when we try and map it all out in advance, we just can't quite get there. And by there, I mean that place, that core of our being, where we really start to believe, yes, I am worthy and I belong, no matter what road I find myself on. When you can let go of the agenda, David shares, that's when you'll find redirection. And I wholeheartedly agree, but it is hard letting go of those agendas, isn't it? So I hope this conversation prompts some self-directed curiosity about the roads and paths you've traveled and where you might need some compassion and healing so that you can fully share all of who you are in whatever callings you are living into. Of course, David's books can be found on the Feeling Beings Who Think bookshelf at bookshop.org. But now, let's just get to today's conversation. Well, welcome, David Achata.
Thank you.
It is very good to have you here. Thank you for making time. I know we've kind of just met each other.
Yeah.
This is only our second conversation.
I know. I'm looking forward to it. Our first one was really fun. You know, sometimes you meet people and you think, there's a lot in common here. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how we kind of riff off each other.
Me too. And, I just want to have to give thanks to Lisa Tilstra for making this connection, because she said, you guys will be able to riff off each other. And she was right.
Did she use that word? Really?
No, but it matches what she said. That connects with what you said.
Right. That's great. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out.
Excellent. Excellent. So why don't we just start by you sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world?
So I work as a coach and consultant. I create leadership development programs for a few companies. And I'm an author. I've been reluctant to call myself that for a few years because I kind of felt like didn't really count, you know. But the more I've continued writing, I'm like, oh, I am an author. I can just keep making book after book after book. So I'll tell you more about the one I'm working on later. But so that's the work. And that's what I do in the world. I'm married to my wife, Amy, who's a therapist, and we've been married for 23 years. And my kids are 16 and 19, and my daughter is right about to turn 20. And I live in East Tennessee, right outside of Chattanooga. And what else?
Well, I have a question already.
Man, let's hear it. I love it. Did you ever watch Stranger Things? You know, Dustin? Have you seen this?
I have.
He goes, why are you keeping this curiosity door locked?
Oh, that's a great question.
So let's open the curiosity door.
Well, some of my curiosity is what is it about calling yourself an author that makes you feel reluctant to claim that?
Well, it's a big part of my story, and I think that it comes back to who you are. Because we in our culture, we want to identify each other by what we do. Like I am this. Not really. I mean, I can do those things, but that's not really who I am. And when I was a kid, I had a really bad case of dyslexia, and consequently, I really struggled in school, didn't do well, grade school, high school, barely graduated high school. And so that really created in me this sense of inadequacy. So I told myself at a young age I wasn't smart. It took me a long time to get over that. And, as like a first half of life type of thinking and questioning is, what do you do? What are your
Mhm.
competencies? How do you flex that in the world? And for a long time, I think I tried to identify myself by what I could do, and ultimately it just exhausted me. And I've come more into who am I? I'm a thinker. I'm a person of deep faith and curiosity. I like to see people treat each other right. I like to see people restored to health. So in a way, I think I'm a healer, and I've come to see myself doing that through my writing and some through my coaching, but definitely through retreats that I have done with people
Mhm.
who come away with me for a few days at a time. But the thing is, back to the question of vocation, and it's this idea of something that you're going to do that transcends any actual job you might have. And people come to stay with me all the time. And when I ask, or when somebody asks them why are they here, because I have a lot of friends and they're always coming over and seeing people staying with me. And it's any number of reasons, but a lot of it, what it comes down to is people are just looking for healthy relationships and healing. And so I'm happy to say that they find that sometimes with me and my family. And so I was reluctant to call myself an author because I didn't really think it counted, but I see now that it really is a way of putting some ideas out there into the world that I couldn't do for everybody, but I could do for a few people in real life. And I'm writing that down. I think in a way, I hope it will benefit more people.
So those of us who in some ways feel we are healers in the world, we tend to come to that type of work through our own process of healing. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
also curious if you might share a little bit about maybe whatever the first half of life stuff was that led you to this particular phase
Mm-hmm.
of getting a lot more comfortable with naming the ways in which you heal and show up and are in the world versus what you do.
Yeah. Came from I mean, I'm not sure how else to say it, but my parents loved me, did the best they could, but they just didn't get along.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of arguing in my home growing up and a lot of other chaotic things happening. And I mean, an example is that, my brother and my dad were at each other all the time. And just when I was probably a toddler, little guy, maybe 1 year old, my brother and my dad got into an altercation in the garage, and my brother decided he was going to stab my dad. So he
Oh,
grabbed
wow.
what he could get, and it was a broomstick, and he ran at my dad, and my dad dodged and then went through the garage door. And so I remember being a kid and growing up and hearing this story and thinking, what is this planet? What is this world? What is this family? That this is what happens or used to happen in this home, because my brother didn't live with us after that. Going even further back, my mother in her first marriage was married to a man who had bipolar disorder. And they had, you know, the chaos that comes with that when you're trying to live with somebody who's struggling mentally. They eventually divorced. He had some reasons that he was upset about my relationship, my parents' relationship, after my mother and my dad got together. And so when this is before I was born, he was coming over and setting things on fire, though she didn't know that was him at the time. So she'd come home and see things burning, cars, pets shot, house vandalized. She started carrying a gun. She was a nurse.
Oh.
So, this is the type of environment I was born into. It took me a long time to really just name it for what it was. To me, it was just the lore of the Achata family. But as I began to get later in life and started having some issues, and started getting some help, people would say, that's not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good. And that's trauma lodged in your body, all that stuff. And that's not even to mention my chaotic teenage years. Like we can go there in a minute if you want. I've just told you like the first year and pre-year of my existence.
Yeah, and it's a lot.
It is. And yeah, and there won't be time to tell it all. But the thing about it, it lodged in my body. And so that's part of the factor, I think, of what led to me having dyslexia as a kid is I just couldn't concentrate because there was so much stuff going on in my house. But I came to the realization that I had some issues I needed to work on after a number of significant events that life threw at me that were screaming, you should slow down. Mm. And I really resisted it. I thought I just needed to, get a lot of sleep and rest, but I realized that I was the culprit who had created this in a way chaotic life. And so what happened actually, so I worked as a pastor for 10 years before I started my own business in the corporate world in 2011 and felt called to church planting. So I started a business to support that. And the way the business has gone has been awesome and a big story. But to fast forward to answer your question is, my mother died while I was planting a church in Southern California, and I was taking care of her for 6 months, flying back and forth to California. She lived in Tennessee and just got utterly exhausted from the isolation, not eating right, the grief of losing a parent. And I went home to California and just started forgetting things. Chronic body pain, crying all the time, getting lost in my neighborhood, driving down the highway. My wife, for a while, just said, don't drive. I'm just going to drive you places. So we decided with the help of some friends that we needed to move away from California and rest. So we moved to Tennessee, and I'm not proud of it, but 6 years later, I had recreated more of the same dynamic.
Well, how would you? I'm sorry. I kind of want to pause for a second because the story is so big and deep,
yeah,
and wide, and you also threw in that other professional identity.
That's right.
That
yeah.
wasn't in the earlier narrative.
yeah, yeah.
And so my experience now, ordained 15 years in the Episcopal Church. Most people that go into ministry are seeking some significant healing in their own lives, whether they want to name that or not.
Yeah.
So what, if you don't mind my just backing up a little bit, what led you to try that path? And I'm curious, you said at a certain point you recognized you needed some help. Mm-hmm. Were you in the midst of that work at the time, or you had left it completely?
Yeah, I was in the midst of it because I stuck with church planting up until last year. And so
maybe say a little bit about what church planting is. That is not a term we use all that much in the church.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, so church planting in its best and purest form, if you can imagine, is going into an area that needs a new gospel work and raising up the indigenous people of that area to lead it and to run it and to contextualize the gospel in whatever way that area needs. And so it's very different from, say, a church startup. A church startup is when you take 20 people or 50 people or 100 who are already Christians. You say, hey, let's get a building and let's do some programs and some groups. And that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. But the way you start is in general the way that you finish. And so if you start that way, then you may end up just getting more Christians who are transplanting. And again, that's okay if that's a calling that you have. It's It's fine. But for me, I felt called to church planting, which was moving to an area and seeing people come to faith and raising up leaders from that area to lead the thing.
How do you know what's the difference between like, because I totally then thought that church planting was the same as the other one. That's exactly how I translated it.
Okay.
So when
Yeah.
you explained it this way, it makes me sound like, is this missionary work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a way to look at it for certain. But I would say the big difference would be, man, that's a whole other subject we could talk about. The missionary way of looking at the Great Commission as an example is we need to go teach people and train them. And there's truth to that. But, the way that European colonialism manifested that in the world was really a lot of death and destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm still dancing with these terms and figuring out where do I live with all these terms. I like the term indigenous people because it's people from the area saying, what would it look like for you to embody this new faith to your friends and to your family and allow it to take the form it's going to take? And that's hard. It's hard work because any of us who's trained and knows a lot of things are tempted to command and control. And it's really hard to open our hands and let the people take things in the direction they want to take it.
What do you think it was about where you were coming from at the time that drew you to that particular way of being in the church? It's very difficult for someone like me to think of the church anything other than an institutional reality.
Yeah.
What you're describing to me sounds so free form and loose that I'm like, how does that level of freedom almost call somebody?
Yeah.
And then are you called to being the catalyst? Are you called to being the leader? Are you called to being a co-discoverer and what's going to happen? I'm very curious about this.
Yeah. It's definitely moving in and out of all those roles at different times. And honestly, I'm at a place now where I'm questioning if traditional models of church and what I'm describing is raising up indigenous leaders. I'm at the place where I'm questioning if they're compatible. Because if you bring a traditional model in, then you already have a template for what you think people should do instead of letting them do what they think they're being led to do. But how I came to it was I was pastoring a church, helping one of a number of pastors at a large church in Florida. And I got into a conversation with a church consultant that we had come, a church growth consultant. And long story short, he said, "Hey, I think you need to lead more things and lead more teams because you're really doing a great job with that." It's like, okay, I love my church. And so I started taking on all these roles and these teams, and I was doing fine. I mean, we were growing the teams, we were developing the programs, people were being served. It was good.
What did you love about that work?
Organization, which relates to the breakdown. So let's tie it back together in a second. Because though I really love and value leadership and organization, I also realize that it has its limits for what it can do. But what happened was simultaneously, I'd gotten a job to teach at one of the local colleges. And it was around the subject of faith and spiritual development. I was really excited to do that because I would be more in the community, but I just didn't have time for it because I was leading all this stuff in the church building. I was also spending time with a bunch of my neighbors, really a bunch of neat guys. And I would just hang with these guys in the afternoon, the evening, weekends. We get to talking, and these men started coming to faith. And so the conversation changed. And I've never been the type of person to like shove something down somebody's throat. It's more of I'm just an evangelist at heart. I talk about Jesus a lot. So these men came to faith, and it was really interesting to try to help them contextualize their faith in the neighborhood. And at that point, I don't think I had the church planting language, and I tried to connect them to my church, and there was some incompatibility because the way that our church was going, though it was a great place, it was really just so outside of how their normal circles of life went. So that's really when the idea of church planting first came to me. This would have been 2009, 2010. There was an old retired missionary man by the name of George Patterson I met. He's passed away now. but he had been in, I think it was Central America as a missionary as a younger man. And I'd gone to a conference and he was telling the story of raising up a indigenous man to follow Jesus and putting him into the structure, the programs. And this man actually ended up murdered sometime later.
Oh my gosh.
And George Patterson was just brokenhearted over it and got to the bottom of it. And really what happened was this man's friends murdered him. And when the authorities said, "Why'd you do that?" They basically said, "Well, he abandoned us." And George Patterson said to me and to I was a part of a training where he was at. He said, "Whose fault was it?" He said, "It was mine." He said, "I pulled him out of his normal life. I should have left him there. I should have taught him how to be a disciple in his normal life."
Hmm.
And
This is so fascinating. It is so, it just, I mean, it sounds, there is this like puppeteer aspect to it. I'm going to be here with these people, and are you enticing them into doing something, or is it really as organic, in that you just talk about the things that interest you, and then they're connecting with these thoughts, and then you create you create them into being some sort of structured, but you're not bringing them into something that's already structured.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's just because like, is there some agenda driving it, or is it just like a basic, I'm sharing my faith, I'm being an evangelist, it's good news, I want to share it.
Mm-hmm. I think, and this comes into like, I think why I do the work that I'm doing today, and still, even though I'm not actively pastoring or planting a church for the first time in my adult life. I mean, within the last year, Jesus, I think, did have an agenda, but it wasn't that. If Jesus were to show up today and look at what we've created, he would be like, how did you guys get this idea?
Oh wait, nothing changed.
Because, I mean, Jesus said over and over again that he came to bring the kingdom among us. And, Dallas Willard would define a kingdom as the range of God's effective will, or a place where his power is at work. So Jesus, he inaugurates his power, his presence on earth. And so if that's true, then we really need to take the role more of detective than all-knowing leader.
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I mean, if you think about how Jesus taught about what the kingdom of God was like, it was all normal life stuff. It's like a woman who lost a coin. It's like a man who brings out a treasure. It's like a seed among thorns, all these common stories.
Mm-hmm.
And if Jesus had come to create the complexities of what we see, then he wouldn't have said things like in Mark 1, where he's healed a whole village, he's cast out demons, and they can't find him. He's behind a bush. They say, "Everybody's looking for you." And he goes, "Let's go somewhere else." So that's one of the most compelling stories to me, because it exemplifies the very different agenda that Jesus had. And so that's why for me, I've always found a home with the bike shop owner, with the French painter, with my friends who are into all sorts of things. I hang with plumbers and mechanics.
Well, if you don't mind my reflecting something, it sounds like you also came at it like you identified as an outsider. Like your
Oh
story
yeah.
created somebody who said, I am an outsider, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore I want to be, with
Yeah.
outsiders. I
Yeah.
always think of that story too, a little bit like Jesus refuses to give into their anxiety. They have
Oh
so much
yeah.
anxiety, about this thing
Uh-huh.
and who this person is. And Jesus is like, I will not do this. You can hunt for me all you want. I'm still just going to be quiet.
I love
We're
that.
going to go somewhere else. Well, I just want to circle back a little bit because I want to hear what attracted you, what called you. Was it this idea of God's overwhelming love? Was it that this idea of an identity? what was it that called you towards the path of ministry in some context?
Mm-hmm. Well, so there's maybe the simple way to say it is I didn't feel like I had any options in this world. I partied long and hard as a teenager. Don't remember a lot of my high school. Had a near-death experience when I was almost 18, and I just sensed the Holy Spirit,
Mm,
pursuing me on my heart, saying, "David, this is not the life I've planned for you."
mm,
And I quote, I mean, it's still seared in my heart. The life I've planned for you is much better than this. And I'm in the backseat of a car covered in throw up. I mean,
mm.
it was nasty. Simultaneously, there were some guys from the local Christian college who had been loving on me and some of my friends for a few years. So I got into deeper relationship with them. And when the time came for me to pick a career track, because I convinced myself I was stupid, I had no ambition for college. I wasn't good in school. I didn't care about college. But my mom, who was really adamant that I got an education of some sort, said, well, you can move out and do life without a degree and see how it goes. But if you're going to continue living here, you've got to go to school.
Mm.
I was like, okay, guess I better pick something. And I thought, well, am I remotely interested in? And I thought, the only role model I have that I want to copy is those guys who loved on me at the local Christian college. And so I went and studied theology and pretty soon started to feel out of place. Like these guys are cracking jokes I don't get. Their sense of humor is not funny to me. I really feel out of place, but I felt like I needed to put my head down and complete something. So I completed it. And I discovered my leadership gifts and my teaching gifts in that world. So I'm thankful for it.
Besides
Um,
feeling, sorry to interrupt, but besides the feeling of being out of place when it came to the subject matter of theology, what aspects of it, like, did they light up your intellect? Did they light up your heart? Did they light up both? Did they open doors of curiosity?
yeah, I think there were two things. I think that one was it gave me some tools through which to connect with more outsiders. And so I just really had a great time, even in college, meeting all sorts of neat people and just sharing with what I was learning, my faith and how I was growing. But then the intellect too. I mean, I remember being utterly fascinated by Greek and Hebrew, the nuances of words.
Yeah.
I mean, even still, I could list so many things that even to this day have stuck with me that fascinate me.
Well, it's great studying things that have no answers.
That's right. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there's something too, those of us who are drawn to that light, maybe because of our own awareness, even if it's not conscious, of healing and
Mhm.
connecting, probably with
Yeah.
our deepest self. When we discover a topic where we get to put ourselves in the topic, but it's not systematic and it's not definitive. And
Mhm.
every time we discover a Greek word and we realize, oh my gosh, it could mean 15 things in English. And now I have to look at the context of everything.
Mhm.
We just keep realizing this capacity within ourselves too, to keep exploring and to keep creating.
Yeah.
And then the
Right.
joy of insight, especially if we're somebody who has said, like, I'm not smart. And we
Mm.
see ourselves as such a
Hmm.
like closed off. It's such a healing process studying these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that you brought that up and took it in that direction because I think that's probably one of the things that drove me away from vocational ministry was because we just live in a society that craves clarity and
Yep.
simplicity. I was in a place at that time where I was surrounded by an organization and people who were just really wanting that. And I was coming with questions and challenges and I just got tired of playing that game and doing that conversation when I could really have a fun, open dialogue with my neighbors. It's like, well, where can I continue this type of
Mhm.
work? That led to the church planning years, and I think also to the corporate world. Like I remember one of my big first corporate jobs, there was a man who asked me a challenging question, and I just had learned, I'd been equipped as a coach to ask him what he meant by that, why it was important that he got that off his chest. He's like, oh, well, if I'm going to hire someone who's going to tell my people what to do, I need to know their training and their background. And because he'd asked some questions about my credentials. I said, oh, actually, I'm not here to tell you guys what to do. It's like, that's not the type of work I do. He's like, oh, really? I said, yeah. I actually put this story, I think, in my first leadership book, which is called Embrace What You Don't Know. It's on this subject. I said to him, look, I'm probably one of the few people around you that will admit I don't understand you. It's like, is that valuable? It's like, so you're a high power guy, and people are probably just saying yes because they don't want to appear foolish. But that's not me. I'm here to admit that I don't understand, help you find your own clarity, and your people and your organization find its own clarity. In many ways, I was approaching my leadership development just like indigenous people development, like church planting. Like, hey, these are the people who have the answers. Come on, let's listen.
Because you just said, like, you and I coach people to say it's okay to ask questions, and experts are lifelong learners. And how did you have the confidence, you think, to be okay with that side of yourself?
Well, it goes back to my origins. I grew up in a world where I never knew the answer. I didn't understand. I couldn't read.
Mm.
I couldn't have made it through high school if I didn't know how to fake it or ask for help. Side point, Angela Duckworth wrote a book called Grit, and she talks about these West Point graduates. This is originally what led her to write it. She was like, they are West Point cadets. You have to have a congressional recommendation. You have to be the top of your class, the strongest, all that stuff. And so why are they quitting? They're the best of the best. Why are they quitting? And here's what she answered it with. Many of those guys had never had to fail anything. So they didn't have the resilience to know how to stick with it. Like they had always been the best. Ariane, that was not me. My life, the majority of my adolescence was me getting used to being at the bottom of the barrel. Mm. And so when somebody challenges me, I don't necessarily, sometimes, but most of the time I don't feel the compulsion to feel like I'm the pro and show up like I have the answers. Like I'm perfectly content to look stupid.
Well, but that's kind of fascinating and amazing to be able to recognize that, the things that would go in this category of weakness, the category of that's what's wrong with me, actually become, the greatest strength, the ways in which you are able to show up in a way that's not like everybody else who is terrified of being intimidated by that man on that call, but instead says, no, you don't intimidate me. I just don't understand. Explain. And then that person is always like, oh shit, I don't talk to people like this.
That's right. Yeah. What? Yeah. It's funny you mentioned weakness, because this is a biblical framework, but to me, it's also a leadership principle that I try to embody. It's a life principle. And it's this idea that God honors the weak things of the world. That's from 1 Corinthians 1.
Yes, it is one of my favorite parts.
I love that one. Yeah. It's also throughout Jesus' stories and exemplified in his life and death is embracing weakness. And in the project I'm working on currently is a reflection on midlife as someone who's in it, not someone who has it all figured out, but somebody who's in it. I just finished a chapter about weakness. One of the ideas that I put in there is that when you can learn to embrace it, what you find is that you will find redirection in disguise. So when you can let go of the agenda, you'll find redirection. And so, like back to that guy in the office, like I couldn't play on the playing field of whatever his agenda was. So I just embraced my weakness, and the whole deal took a different direction.
Yep.
So weakness can feel like good news if we can get ourselves to the point of feeling okay with it.
Well, and we recognize that what we're worried about is how that other person perceives me, but that doesn't matter. A, because I have no idea how they perceive me because I can't read their mind. And B, their perception of me doesn't shame me. It will not shame me, which is exactly in my, the First Corinthians, God chose what was weak. Jesus didn't have shame in that way. Jesus didn't say like, oh, I'm worried how everybody's going to think of me when I'm hanging naked on that cross.
Yeah.
All he thought about was love. Well, he didn't even think it. He just was it.
Yeah. That's right. So true.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. We could like to deep theology. So here's though where I want to go, because there's a point here that's like a very interesting connection to me. I'm noticing this more in my denominational world professionally, people moving more into partnering with people as coaches, consultants, but coaches.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned loving to work with teams. You mentioned how you like to do leadership work, but what is that for you? And I don't know, just riff on what I said.
Yeah. I love that. Let's use that word. Well, it does come back to the point that I sort of marked a minute ago about organization. Like I do have a leadership gift and I understand organizations, and I worked as an organizational health consultant for a while. I was mentored by two guys who worked for Microsoft in that role, and I was really grateful for how they helped me understand that world. But I can't speak for everyone. But for me, at this point in my life, I feel like I have, in some ways, kind of blown those fuses. Because, in the first half of life, a lot of it's marked by being known by what you can do, by your competencies. And the second half of life is learning to shift into who you are and looking at your own heart and your own character and learn to live out of that. And so I still do the leadership development work, but the way I'm going about doing it has really deepened, I think, in the last few years. To talk with the teams and the groups I work with and the companies about their own character and their own maturing. It's like a mentor friend of mine says, to mature and mellow. That's what he tells me all the time. And so, yeah, I'm still doing it, but I'm putting a lot less pressure on the managerial skill type stuff that leaders can do. And I'm putting more on the practice of who we are. So like even today, I mean, I was on a virtual call with one of the teams I work with, and we were reviewing a feedback model, and part of the feedback model is to express your feelings. And universally, when teams go through that model, they're like, man, that's the hardest part. And so we got to talking about the value of going on the internet and finding a wheel of feelings and just sitting with it in the morning and asking, how do I feel? Where am I at? Let the feeling wash over you. Gain some emotional fluency. And if you can, yourself get that emotional fluency, then you'll better to be able to connect with others. And it won't just be like a skill and a feedback model to say a feeling word. It'll be something you're actually living out of. And so like I told them basically everything I just told you, which is very different from what I would have done, say, 10 years ago. Been like, yeah, go memorize some feelings and just try those.
Yep.
Head, like use that prefrontal cortex instead of getting into the depths of your own soul and your story.
Yeah. I mean, not to highlight the title of this podcast, but it comes from, we want to believe we are thinking beings who sometimes feel. And the truth is we are feeling beings who sometimes think.
Yes.
We don't have any emotional vocabulary that's expansive enough to contain all the ways in which we feel all the live long day. I love that feeling wheel. It's beautiful. It's got tons of great words.
Wow. Let me just make sure I got that. We don't say that again. We don't have the words.
This is Brene Brown. And it's also, it's not just Brene Brown. It's the woman who wrote A Stroke of Insight. And I'm blanking on her name.
Okay.
We want to believe we are thinking beings who sometimes feel, but the truth is we are feeling beings who sometimes think and sometimes not that well.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to give attention. Or I don't say, we're not enculturated to do that. It's not encouraged. I think we encourage children to feel their feelings, but then once it starts inconveniencing us as parents, and I'll speak for myself, when my daughter's feelings start inconveniencing me, I want her to stop and move on because I have things that I have to do, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's simplistic, but we want to intellectualize everything and we don't want to feel our way into new knowledge. Talking with a client recently, you know, she wants to understand everything before it becomes a choice or a pattern of behavior. But no, we don't understand it first and then start manifesting or becoming it. We become it and we create it in real time. And then, and we feel all the feelings of fear, vulnerability. Is this right? Is this wrong? Because it doesn't feel familiar and patterned yet. I mean, this is right. And we support people in their journey towards behavioral changes or modifications. And then that creates the insights. That creates the learning because we're constantly becoming.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been a big part of my own journey, of really exhausting myself with trying to know everything and think everything. Honestly, I think that's what led to the equivalent of, I mean, probably to, I don't know if it was really mental breakdown, but serious points of exhaustion, of just overthinking rather than learning to accept what is real and allow my body to go in that direction. Like one of the things I was thinking about even just today is that what I have done as a habit in my life for a long, long time is overthinking, over obsessing, over controlling the factors on the chessboard of life rather than learning to just accept and interact with what's actually there. And the way that I've come about in my own healing journey is slowing down, doing less, getting myself into good friendships and good environments where there's conversations about growth and healing. So yeah, that's been the journey of my life, just to get back into my feelings, into my heart. I can't say I'm always there, but I'm there a lot these days.
Well, isn't it so interesting how these journeys in our lives take us back into ourselves?
They do.
So I don't know if that's a place that connects with what you're writing about now, but if you want to talk a little bit about that, I'm sure it connects in some way.
Oh man. Yeah. So my very first book that I wrote was a self-published book on what it was like to watch my mother die. And it's on Amazon. You can grab it. It's called In the Caverns, The Darkness of Grief and the Dawn of Life Change. And it just tells the story about what it's like to be a caregiver and to really struggle with duty and obligation. You know, I was doing the church thing. I was working at a semiconductor company, among other companies, but doing a lot of work there, helping merge teams after acquisitions. And I was just really struggling with letting all that go to care for my mom. And so then I wrote two other business books, and then the next one that I'm working on is about what happened after we left California. I've had a lot of people say, "Hey, like, what you need to write that." And the next one is not a memoir-like book. It's more of a guide for a way of thinking about your life in places of transition. And so in the book, I tell a lot of my own stories and how when we moved back to this area of Tennessee where I'm originally from, I really had to face the shame of what it was like to come back to my own hometown that I just thought was gross and I never wanted to come back to. So I talk about facing, your own shame, facing your own story. And I also share in there about a number of retreats I did where I had to go deeper into my story and figure out, how did I get this way? So the pain of moving back to this area subsided initially after a lot of rest, but a number of years later, I recreated just a super busy schedule for myself. So I actually struggled for probably off and on for 7 years, but really intense for probably about 3 years with chest pain,
Mm.
thinking I was going to die young. And so I share in the book that I'm working on about what I did to get underneath the way that my own undealt with stuff was manifesting in my body. And so I did a couple of intensive retreats. One was with the organization in Nashville called 10 Man Ministries. And they have you draw out your story in pictures, and you tell the long version, like the 4 hour version. And trained therapists and counselors are listening to you, asking you questions, helping you see what was going on there. It's really great at diagnosis. I did another, and there's more they do, but that was the part that was really impacting to me. And then I did another intensive about a year later at a place called the Bridge to Recovery in Kentucky. It's a drug and alcohol treatment center. They do an intensive for professional helpers. So they guided us through a lot of great things, inner child work. And in particular, what was very helpful to me was Gestalt therapy.
Uh-huh.
So for listeners who don't know that, Gestalt therapy is bringing in, you do some pre-work about what you want to say, what's the story? How did you feel? What should have been said that you couldn't say? Because when you're a kid, you can't defend yourself. You're dependent on your caregivers. So your survival is dependent on agreeing with them, even if what they're doing and the ways they're behaving is crazy. And so Gestalt therapy was actually one of the biggest transformative things. And so what they do is they have you call in those who have harmed you, and they put them in the metaphorical empty chair.
Yep.
And you talk to them. And if you're out of words, the therapist helps you. And then after you've gotten off your chest what needs to happen, they give you a bat, and you go pound a mat while you say what needs to be said. And it's not rage. It's not out of control. The point is that you're releasing trauma from your body and you're putting it into your muscles. It's like in the wild when a gazelle gets attacked by a lion. And if it survives, they go and they shake it off for a while. And we don't have that as Homo sapiens, like we
No,
probably
yeah.
used
We
to.
have panic attacks where our body just
Yeah.
finally tells us, you will deal with me and you will
Yeah.
deal with the trauma that's in here.
Yeah. So one way to get it out is with something like Gestalt therapy. And I think people's intense activities like um, ultra marathons or running or mountain biking, these intense activities can help with that. But if it's not paired with good emotional work, then you're just trying to outrun your own pain. And I found that for myself because I'm a runner, I'm a mountain biker, and that was my life. And so I called in all these people, my parents, siblings, friends. There was some racism I wanted to deal with. So I called in those in the institutions who I felt like did me wrong. I got it all out of my system. And the wild part about it was that when I was done, the chest pain had subsided by probably 90%.
Mm.
And it took some more to kind of go to the next 10%. But Gestalt therapy is amazing. And so I'm writing about some of those experiences and some general principles that are counterintuitive. I don't want to give them all away because I want people to get the book eventually. But one of them, as an example, we already mentioned, is weakness. And if you want to get in touch with true strength, then you really have to find your own weakness. Because nothing is stronger and nothing is more compelling than a person who says, I don't want to do that. That's not me. I'm actually going to go over here and do this.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I actually feel like is important. Suddenly people want to follow that as opposed to the crowd mentality. So that's an example. There's a lot of counterintuitive things in there. So the working title is called Jumpstart Your Midlife. And I've got an agent. It's being shopped to publishers. I hope someone will pick it up. If not, we'll see what happens next. But I feel very differentiated between me and the success or not of this book, which means I'm probably in a good place to write it because I'm okay if it takes off and I'm okay if it doesn't. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing anyway. So yeah, so that's what I'm working on right now.
Well, and once again, I just think or feel or what both of these things. not being tied to the success is that it has nothing to do with the fact that the process for you of writing this book is incredibly important to who you are and who you are becoming. And, you touched on it. I don't remember exactly the phrase you said, but we are really, really afraid of going back and mining our story. We're so afraid. And even the idea, like, it's not quite memoir, but all of our wisdom comes from what we've lived through. I mean, and all the people most of us are attracted to because of their big concepts or thinking or how they show up in the world comes from us connecting with their story.
Yeah, that's right. It's so true.
And we don't have enough spaces where people get to examine their stories. I mean, because there's all the types of therapies you described. I definitely think coaching connects people with their story and, their ways of being. But if we're lucky, maybe some of us have a crisis that insists we deal with our story.
So I want to see what you think. I have an answer for this, but you made a statement. I want to ask you what you think, because I'm just going to test my hypothesis. Why don't you think we have enough spaces or good spaces for people to tell their stories in our culture in the United States?
Oh, because of what we were just talking about. We don't have the emotional capacity to talk about it. We're not given any tools, most of us, until much later in life. We're raised in homes that haven't been given tools, and we just learn by what we see, and we think that's the way the world is, like, just generally speaking. I mean, exactly what you just said. Most of us don't have the capacity within ourselves to belong enough to ourselves to stand in our truth and not just go along with the flow, if for anything, just to not appear to be different.
Yeah.
So I think there certainly seems to be a lot more of us who care so much about our own human potential, which comes from examining our weakness, right? That is exactly where our power lies.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's why the institutional church is losing and continues, because it's so stuck in a doctrinal relevancy of definitive answers as opposed to coming.
Yeah, I think in the strain of church that I have been a part of in the evangelical, church, it's so outcome focused. That's our cultural problem, is that everything has to run like a business.
Yes, and definitely including the church.
Definitely. And so because of that, we have to move people in a certain direction all the time, rather than, I mean, we don't have to, but that's what we're trained for. That's the cultural artifact. And I just wonder what it would look like if we could learn to shift that and say, well, we don't actually have to rush this one and push it toward a deliverable. We can be with this and accept it, as opposed to trying to fix it. And I think that's another reason why we struggle. I think we're not equipped, but I think that, but what comes with our cultural blinders is that we want to jump in and fix it, because here we go, because your pain just reminds me that I have some.
Yep.
And when you're feeling yours, I feel mine. Therefore, I'm going to give you a Kleenex and say, don't cry. We don't even know we're doing it. So what I'm trying to write about coming up is, it's okay to be a puddle.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be fixed. I mean, we can release the pressure on ourselves. We can heal. I mean, it's like, think about a broken leg. You don't like beat it and say, hurry up. You nurse it.
Well, would you agree with, it sounds, when I listen to your story, it sounds like, in a way, we move towards these things because we're trying to fix them. And then they're not getting fixed because that kind of immediate fix that we're seeking isn't going to work. I mean, certainly becoming a priest, pastor, I wasn't trying to fix something about who I am, but I've definitely come to see that the vocation, through the vocation, I have discovered healing I didn't know I would discover. And what I thought the solution wasn't the solution.
That's right. Yeah.
So I hear some of that in your story too. You went towards something because it seemed the solution, but that's not how, but you still got to the healing. And it's maybe also the difference
Yeah.
between healing versus solving.
Yeah. Well, I think that God in his kindness allows us to walk a certain path that might exhaust us so that we can come to the end of ourselves.
Mm.
It's like the matrix, the mystery of human attachment. Like we're attracted to a mate that we think initially will heal us. But what happens is they infuriate us and expose our worst parts. And we can either like fight them and destroy them or get rid of them, or we can look inward and say, wait a minute. And I think it's the same thing with our careers. Not all of us, but many of us, and I think many, many clergy are attracted to the world of people and significance because they themselves need that. And so there's so much pressure to do really great work when really what people are just trying to do is heal themselves. And it's not until we're utterly exhausted that we're like, wait a second, do I count too? Is the gospel good news for me? Can I
Mm-hmm.
relax? Can I accept it? And all it takes is one friend to say, hey, just so you know, you can put all this down and chill and rest. I
Mm-hmm.
can? Yeah, you can.
Yep. I was listening to somebody say, we don't even recognize as clergy how we want to be God
Mm, yeah,
and how it's very, very hard for us to take in the good news that we preach and teach.
man, it so is so hard.
So let's see.
I didn't think I was going to talk so much about
Yeah,
the
no,
pastoral
this is
life. This is
great. This
great.
is great. I hope you don't mind that I drew us there a little bit, but,
No.
and it's also in some ways, it still is a unique profession, and I think people are curious what in the world, because we are a business culture, we are a corporate culture, and I just certainly didn't know how much that culture would influence parish ministry,
Hmm.
but we have bills to pay and, all of that stuff too.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I don't know. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to conclude? What do you want to conclude with? Do you want to conclude with,
Hmm. Well, maybe let's come back to that word organization, because to me, what really brought me to the end of myself was overly organizing and controlling people and things and directions and plans. I think my plea to people is, can you just get curious and look at the facts of the life that you've created? And my plea is, please look at it and ask how you got there. And what if the reason was you created it? As opposed to what we often say is, well, here's all the circumstances that happened to me. Now, don't get me wrong, like plenty of circumstances have happened to me. And I'm not downplaying hard stuff that happened because I've had all my own share of all that. But I couldn't control any of that. What about the life that's around me? Is it a life-giving life? Is it a life-taking life? If it's not a life-giving life, then maybe it's time to go into the quiet. Turn some stuff off, take some deep breaths, get with a trusted friend, trusted counselor, and start examining what was it in you that created the circumstances that you found yourself in, and deal with that. Who was it in my wound, my greatest wound? I saw your glory and it dazzled me.
oh, I don't know. I love it though.
Look it up, listeners. It's slipping me. It's St. Augustine or somebody like that. But in your deepest wound, the glory, the presence, the kindness of the divine is waiting for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it will dazzle you what you see. And if you can get in touch with what's there, you'll heal up.
I concur. I say, I think that is exactly, and it's never exhausted. And the number of people that needs to point us to that truth is never too many. and people who are courageous enough, I think, to share their story around what dazzled them as they did that deep work. It's very healing for people. It's healing for the person who shares it. And it's really powerful and healing for the people who connect with it, because it normalizes, a lot of their own stuff.
Yeah.
And encourages them.
Yeah.
It's very loving thing to do.
So maybe that's a good point to maybe land the plane on. What do you think?
I think it's great. I love it. I'm already excited to listen back on the conversation.
Oh, awesome.
It's actually one of the gifts for me of doing the podcast is I get to edit it and listen again. And, after things percolate for a little bit, once you've had the conversation, it's a real gift. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Achata, for sharing so generously from your own story and for the work you do in the world. And I'm excited to read your next book. And I will have all the books on my little bookshelf at bookshop.org as well. So,
cool. Thank you.
They can go to Amazon or they can go to Bookshop.
Awesome.
But thanks so much. And hopefully I would love to have another conversation.
Oh, you're welcome. I would love that. And thank you for being such a good host and listener and opening up those curiosity doors.